This is a Heart and Hand production.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Scout Report. As always, I'm your host, Adam Thornton, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Smith. Jeremy, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thank you. So we're here to talk about Abdallah Sima, but I just want you to give a little bit of a background, if you can, on yourself, how you got into football, what you do, what your expertise are, if that's okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of doubly qualified, if that's the right word, for this particular report, because I'm from Brighton. I'm a big Brighton fan, and obviously Sima is officially a Brighton player, but I'm also a French football correspondent, and he spent the last season on loan in France. So hopefully I can give you a little bit of insight from two different angles there.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan. So talk to us about, I guess, your expertise in France. How did that come about? French Football Weekly, for those of you who don't know, has been going for quite some time. I think over 10 years. How did you get
over 10 years? Yeah.
How did you come to get involved in that?
So I'm half French. I've got a dual nationality, so I've always sort of followed French football, and I guess sort of whatever it was 10, 12 years ago, kind of discovering Twitter, wanting to get into sort of football writing, and I mean, it's developed into podcasting, and it wasn't really such a big thing then, even though we were already doing podcasts. Basically sort of just played around on Twitter, was looking for French football coverage, found the site, asked if I could get involved, and it's sort of gone on from there, really. But I'd have been watching French football anyway. It's just nice that as a sort of hobby, and sometimes it's turned into a little bit more than a hobby, that I'm able to sort of do it with a little bit more of a kind of professional angle, I guess.
I think it sort of first came into my awareness was when Lille won the league. Was that was in 2011, I think. The time before, if you like, and obviously Eden Hazard was there as well, and that's what it sort of. You're right, Twitter was still in its infancy. I think there was maybe, I would say I'd been on maybe 2 or 3 years, but it was still quite new and exciting. So that's when I first sort of became aware of you guys, and I've followed you ever since. Okay, so yeah, like you said, probably quite uniquely suited to this with the Brighton angle and the French angle. Let's talk about France first, if that's okay. I think he's only made one cup appearance for Brighton last season. So let's chat about France and Angers. Football fans these days, it seems, are, I was going to say obsessed with numbers and data, but I am probably obsessed with that as well. But more and more we're seeing, looking at transfer market, going through injury histories, looking at goals and assists, and sort of writing off players, if you like, without really having spent the time to look at them in great detail. So on the face of it, Angers looked like a really, really poor team last year. Sima looked like he didn't play very much for the first couple of months, and then he sort of came back into it and was playing regularly towards the end of the season. The goals numbers aren't great for a striker who's going to be coming to Rangers and expecting to be not the number one, but expecting to be a first pick and getting 15, 20 goals per season. However, I'm sure there's lots of context around that I'd like to dig into with you. So talk to us, I guess, about Angers. I know they finished last year. Was that a surprise? Were they the worst team in the league? What sort of situation was Sima going into last season?
So firstly, it's pronounced Angers.
Angers,
but that's all right. But I mean, they were a complete bin fire last season. Basically, they're a very small club who arguably don't have any right to be in the top division, and they got into the top division a few years ago under a very, very settled setup in the background, like a manager who'd been there for over 10 years, who worked extremely well with his president and his sporting director. And they went up, they stayed up, they kind of comfortable sort of mid-table. Then things started going wrong off the pitch, change in sort of sporting directorship. Then that long-standing manager left, and just there's been a hell of a lot of politics, quite a bit of controversy as well. Even this season, they've had 3 different coaches, and also last summer they got rid of 3 or 4 players who between them altogether probably have well over 1,000, probably close to 2,000 appearances between them. So although they had a few relatively decent young players coming through, they lost in one go a hell of a lot of experience and nous and professionalism and all that kind of thing. So I don't think it was a massive surprise to anyone that this season has gone really badly for them. I think they had 4 wins all season, and 2 of them were quite late when it sort of didn't even matter anymore. I think it's probably fair to say that they didn't often get sort of absolutely pummeled. Like, there was a bit of competitiveness there, a bit of fight, certainly at the end, but the writing was on the wall from very, very early on. And for anyone coming in, I guess, especially a lone player, is pretty difficult to, to think that you're being given like every opportunity to thrive there.
Yeah, so I guess, not an ideal environment for a player who has just turned 21, as he was last season, coming off the back of a pretty rough year of injuries, where he was at Stoke and didn't play very much. Not the best environment. There's another little link here, because Sima was obviously at Slavia Prague the year before, played against Rangers in the Europa League. Quite a bad-tempered game. This was the one where Glenn Kamara had the sort of racism storm. I'm not sure if you were aware of that or you remember it. Sima was highly rated, I think, before that. He did play well in those games. I think there were others that played better. But we have seen him. He has been at Ibrox. In those games, he played all across the front 3, I think, at various points in those games. What has he been used as, I guess, at Angers? What type of role has he played? In your opinion, did he have a good season despite all of that sort of bin fire, as you say, going on around him?
Yeah, I think, as you said, Brighton signed him from Slavia Prague. He had a very good record there. Then he was loaned out to Stoke, and that was sort of the season before last. And basically, the season was a write-off. He had so many sort of niggling injuries that I don't think any of them were serious injuries, but he was pretty much out all season. So coming into a new club, a new country, a new culture, off the back of not having played for a year, trying to get back into things where it's not a great environment anyway, I think was pretty tough for him. And I think I'd like to say that he should probably just be judged on his 2023 record than anything he did sort of the first half of the season. And if you take that, it's not terrible. I think 4 of his 5 league goals are in 2023. Maybe all of them, actually. I'm not 100% sure. Most of his starts are in 2023. And within a team that was struggling, and even, like Unai, who's sort of one of the breakout stars of the World Cup, was at Angers. He left in the January transfer window. So actually, they were, if anything, they were weakened for the second half of the season. So, you just add a little bit more context there to how hard it was. I think he did decently, and as you said, on the face of it, 5 goals in the season isn't fantastic, but when you put in all those other factors, and he was, I think, Angers' top scorer for what it's worth, says something about him. He played mainly as centre forward for them, but I think he is sort of quite versatile, can play across the front, even as a sort of second striker. I think he's one of those players who probably will end up as an out-and-out centre forward, but certainly can sort of play in certainly a 4-3-3 as one of the sort of wider players. He's decent at running into the channels. He's quick. He can beat people. Decent enough on the ball. So it's not just someone who's a fox in the box, although he's got the strength, the aerial ability, and a decent shot on him. So, all in all, I'd say that all of the raw tools are there. It's just about, I guess, his body and the club he's in giving him a chance to really sort of get a head of steam behind him, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because we at Rangers we have a kind of 4-3. Well, we have had a 4-3-3 formation for quite some time, but since Michael Beale came in, in November. We've sort of switched, I would say, certainly from January or February onwards. We've been predominantly playing with maybe more of a 4-3-1-2 or a diamond. So we've had sort of two strikers up the top, a sort of more number 9 type figure, and then a player who can play wide, can move wide, can drop into space, can sort of float a little bit. We've been using Fashion Sakala in there, who has quite an unorthodox style, but it certainly has been absolutely getting the numbers in terms of goals and assists. So on the face of it, it sort of feels like to me that Sima could come in and sort of play that role, be competition in that role. But equally, if we do move to maybe more of a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, he's sort of capable on either side as well, which is really, really good. I just had a quick look at his stats there, and his first goal was the 1st of January, so you're spot on, just that it was all in 2023. In terms of that sort of playing style then that you mentioned, how difficult for you was it, or how difficult is it in Ligue 1 to be a striker when you're at such a sort of lowly league or a team with not a huge amount of possession? Because the one thing that's going to happen at Ibrox is 65-70% of the possession pretty much every single game. How difficult is that for you in Ligue 1, and is that something you think you'd be adaptable to?
I think Ligue 1 sort of opened up. It used to be, until maybe like 2-3 years ago, is a very defensive league, and it's opened up a little bit. And yeah, I guess, I mean, you know, it's different. If he was at PSG, he'd be sort of playing against low blocks most weeks, and at Angers, he's sort of playing probably in a team with a low block. So it's a bit different. But I think because of his ability, because he's decent on the ball, but also shown that, you know, he's got good composure when Angers are hitting a team on the break, for example. I think he can probably adapt. But yeah, I guess it's going to be very much a change in mindset, where he's, you know, since he's been at Slavia Prague a couple of years ago, he's not used to playing for a team, I guess, with sort of high expectations and looking to win titles and win trophies. You know, Angers was right from the start all about just trying to survive. So now it's going to be very different. I think, you know, he's got, like I said, the raw ability, the strength and the hold-up play to kind of, you know, be sure to sort of recycle possession. He works hard. He can do his defensive shift when necessary, although, you know, obviously that would be less needed, hopefully, at Rangers than it would at Angers. So I think he's definitely got the sort of adaptability to fit into a team that's going to be more possession based. Yeah, I guess it sort of depends where he's playing. If he's playing more on the flank, maybe you'd say that he's more in a kind of counter-attacking mode. As a centre forward, maybe, you know, there to kind of put away chances where they come from crosses from wide or sort of more vertical. I think he just needs to adapt to that and have a chance to sort of develop.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds interesting, certainly. As of now, we know it's a loan that's been mooted. We think there are some possibilities of a loan to buy option, but as we're recording right now, we don't know any more detail on that. I'd be quite interested in your thoughts on, obviously, being a Brighton fan. When Sima was signed, what was the sort of general reaction? I guess caveating that by Brighton do tend to make a habit of signing players that are maybe unknown or less fancied, and then it sort of becomes a bit of a slow burner. You put them out on loan and they come back and they're a superstar in the case of Mitoma, or they're actually very, very good in the case of maybe Undav or various others. So what was the sort of reaction at that point? And is there a disappointment, I guess, how things have gone, or is it just a case of you win some, you lose some, and Brighton tend to win more than they lose just now with this sort of signing?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I mean, it's weird that a lot of Brighton transfer announcements are not met with huge fanfare by the fans, because more often than not, it's someone no one's heard of, or someone who, you know, in maybe 4 years' time will be a very good player. In that context, it's kind of weird to think of Sima as maybe one of the older players at 21, 22 now, because we're signing sort of 17, 18-year-olds a lot of the time. I think I wouldn't say there was excitement at the time, but I think there was sort of positive expectation when he was loaned to Stoke, because it felt like, you know, rather than, you know, even Caicedo's, who's just turned out to be absolutely amazingly, but he went to a team struggling to stay up in the Belgian league. I think, you know, while Stoke might not necessarily have been a favourite to go into the Premiership, I think Premier League to be loaned to a Championship team, I think maybe felt that he was being looked at as someone who was closer to getting into the Brighton team than other loanees. And also that was obviously at the time when we were really struggling to score goals under Graham Potter. So he's been a little bit unlucky, and it's kind of very much changed, I think, fans' expectations that the Stoke season went terribly just because he wasn't able to play all season, barely. And in the meantime, we've changed managers, changed style a little bit, and now suddenly found our scoring boots. But I think, you know, Undav, although he had a great record in Belgium, I think everyone knew when he came in that would be a sort of big kind of adaptation process, and we didn't know yet whether it would work out or not. And for a lot of the season, it didn't. And he scored a handful of goals at the end of the season, which are kind of positive going into the next season. And I guess that in itself has a knock-on effect. I mean, you could look at it both ways. It means that there's definitely still hope for Sima at Brighton, or it's pushed him a little bit further away from the first team. But so I think a lot just depends on how the season goes. You know, Rangers being in Britain and at the top, so will get a lot more exposure than someone at the bottom of the Belgian league, for example. If he does well, you know, our loan system is very good. We've got David Weir, who's obviously got Rangers connections. Gordon Greer is now our loan manager.
Okay.
Cool. I don't know if he was ever at Rangers, but obviously Scottish connections.
Yeah.
So, you know, all our loanees are well followed anyway. But if Sima does well, he will get more media exposure. The fans will be able to follow more closely what he's doing, more access to being able to watch how he's doing. So I don't think it's out of the question that he could still have a future at Brighton. But the other thing is, obviously, we're in a very different place this year to where we were last year. You know, a lot depends on how this season goes and what kind of transfer, you know, not projecting too far into the future. But this summer, we're looking at bigger names, bigger squads, because we're going to be playing in Europe.
Of course, yeah.
There's a good chance that we struggle with, you know, losing our midfield with the extra matches. We finish mid-table when next year we're, you know, going back to... I'm not criticising us because we massively overachieved, but to a much more modest transfer window, which then maybe gives him a better chance. I'm sort of going around in circles. But basically what I'm saying is his Brighton career is definitely not over, but it's up to him to prove himself at Rangers. And then I think Brighton are always open to offers for any player for the right price. And their system, bringing in a lot of these young players and developing them either at the club or on loan, is obviously they're not all going to get into Brighton's first team, but the aim is at least, you know, to make a profit on any player. So I think we signed him for maybe sort of £6 million, something like that. So, you know, a decent season. If Rangers put in a good bid, I'm sure Brighton will listen to offers.
Yes, it's interesting.
A lot depends on how our season goes, how our strikers play. We don't... I would say De Zerbi doesn't really play with an out-and-out striker, but then you've got someone like Welbeck, who actually is probably a relatively similar profile to Sima, and Evan Ferguson, who hopefully will really go on to another level this year. So, that he's got some tough competition there, basically.
No, definitely. It's interesting. I know exactly what you mean with those sort of growing pains this year. If a club maybe overachieves and then they have to do things really, really quickly in the market, you'll need a bigger squad, like you said, 3 or 4 extra players. It could end up being too much and being spread too thin this year. We have seen it before in the Premier League, that clubs then become... I mean, look at West Ham this year, for example. Maybe those European exertions have pushed them down a little bit more. So yeah, it's not out with the realms of possibility. I hadn't realised that. I guess the interesting thing from a contractual point of view is that he has 2 years to go right now on his Brighton contract. So if Rangers have him for a year, then next summer it would obviously only be 12 months to go. So there may be some sort of pricing thing there, maybe factored into a buy clause or even a lower transfer fee. So we'll see how it goes. Rangers have done a bit of business so far. We've got 4 signings in at the minute. There seems to be a bit of a pattern with them that not necessarily fallen stars. I don't think that's the right word, but maybe players that have not had the best of luck at their current club. Sam Lammers, for example, did very, very well in Holland when he was younger with Heerenveen and PSV. Then he's moved to Atalanta and he's been playing for Sampdoria and Frankfurt as well. So kind of in maybe a similar situation, maybe not as stark as Angers, but moving from a sort of possession-heavy team in a smaller league to maybe a less possession-heavy team in a lower league. The same for Cyril Dessers, even Todd Cantwell coming in from Norwich. The feeling, I guess, whether it's hope or whether it's just sort of educated guesses from fans, is that these type of players who did well in similar level clubs or similar possession-based clubs would then come to Rangers and be able to showcase their skills. Looking at Sima when he was at Slavia Prague, it's very, very similar in terms of their domination relative terms in the league to what Rangers and Celtic have in Scotland. I think Slavia were 63% possession, I checked earlier on, whereas you look at Angers and you look at Stoke and they're under 50%. So I guess in theory there, it's very, very simplistic, but in theory there, Sima seems pretty comfortable when he's got a lot of the ball, as at Slavia Prague. And he also seems, like you said, he's done well once he's been free of injuries and got a run in the team with Angers. He's been able to adapt to both styles there. So I guess that's a positive on his skill set, especially being still so young.
Yeah, I think, as you said, 21, 22, in a way, he's already got a lot of experience, played in, a couple of countries, played for teams at the top, teams at the bottom, different expectations, overcome tough injuries, played in, as you said earlier, in front of hostile crowds and, having to deal with, I don't know, but based on what you said, there's a reasonable chance he himself has had to sort of face a bit of racism from opposing fans in Czech Republic as well. So, he's already sort of amassed a lot of experience on and off the pitch. And so hopefully in that sense, he can adapt. It made me think when you said about players who sort of didn't quite work out at their previous club. I mean, it did work out for him, and it was, again, like it was off-pitch stuff and, bad luck with, I think, a heart scare or something like that, and then sort of being overtaken. That Connor Goldson is still really loved at Brighton, and that connection may help Sima to an extent. I don't know. It can't do any harm. So yeah, I think he should be able to adapt pretty well.
I think that's an interesting one as well when you talk about injuries, because Goldson, obviously maybe it's slightly different when, like you said, it was a heart surgery thing, but he came in and for the first 4 seasons literally barely missed a minute. Last year he got a couple of niggling injuries, but his first 4 seasons it was like 55 appearances, 60 appearances, 63 appearances the year before last, I think it was. So that sort of piece there about not always taking the injuries as being a sort of forecast for the future. It could just be completely unlucky. But you're right there. The connection's there as well with Brighton. And I had completely forgotten about the Davy Weir connection as well in terms of the loan market. So that's one that maybe, I guess if this goes well, Rangers and Brighton could look to maybe do things in the future. But I'd completely forgotten about that link as well. So thank you.
I think also in terms of temperament, it's not, look, Liga is not, I'm not going to say it's not the most competitive. It's not a country where fans are as passionate as Spain or in Italy or Scotland. So from that point of view, maybe for the last year, he's been playing in a way with a little bit less pressure, even though there was sort of the spectre of relegation. But, he's been able to perform at places like PSG, Marseille. I think it was actually at the Velodrome where he scored a great goal for Angers, sort of on the break and then hitting it into the top corner against Marseille. So, So he's got that sort of temperament and composure. So I think it's another string to his bow as well.
I'm going to put you on the spot just before we finish. If you could sum up the player in terms of his technical style in 1 or 2 tweets, what would you say? It doesn't need to be exactly 300 characters or whatever it was, but just a kind of succinct statement. How would you describe him as a player?
I'd say, first of all, a hard worker, which I think will sort of endear him to fans. I think when you're seen to work hard, then you can be forgiven for a couple of bad misses or whatever, because at least you show you care. He's got physical attributes, but footballing attributes as well. Decent with the ball, decent in the air. As I said, he's got all the skills, but because of his youth and his injuries a couple of seasons ago and who he played for last year, they're all very, very raw. But if they can be polished by the right team, I think he can be a pretty complete striker.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about Sima. Where can the listeners and the viewers hear more from you?
So I'm on Twitter at JeremySmith98, and we're taking a summer break. We might do a couple of podcast specials, but as you said, French Football Weekly podcast. So at French FT Weekly on Twitter.
Yeah, we'll pop that in the show description. Jeremy, thank you very much, and once again, thank you all for listening and watching. We'll be back next week.
That was a Heart and Hand production.